And then we'll know if it's literal or it's a metaphor. We'll see how it happens. Not only in the books of the prophets, but also in Gemara, in Medrash, and different sources about Mashiach, it's not clear whether it's metaphoric or it's to be taken literally. However, there's one exception, and that exception is there's one place in Torah which for sure whatever is written there has to be taken literally, and that is in the book of Halacha. When you open any book of Halacha, Shulchan Aruch, any book of Halacha, and it says something there, it's not a metaphor, but it means literally to do what it says. So when it says that Friday night we light Shabbos candles, it doesn't mean to meditate on fire and the different colors and the lights. It means literally to take a match and strike it and light a fire. And literally to drink wine and literally to eat fish and to make challah, even though all these things have also spiritual significance and there's a lot to meditate on and a lot to understand. But if it's in a book of halacha, it means physically, literally do A, B, C. There's only one book of halacha that has the laws that pertain to Mashiach. The only one who wrote such a book was the Rambam, Maimonides. Also, you'll learn more about this. In fact, Maimonides was the first one in general to write halacha. Before Rambam, there was no such thing as one book that had all the practical halachas. Which means if someone wanted to know what the halacha is, they had to study the Talmud, know what it says in all different places of the Talmud, what does it say on the commentaries of the Talmud, and derive from that, based on everything, this must be the halacha. But there was no one book that spelled out in brief. Practically, it's like a handbook. Do this, do it this way, don't do it that way. The first one to do that in history was Rambam Maimonides, and after him, it was followed by someone who wrote a book of halacha called the Tur. 200 years later, Rabbi Yosef Kaya wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and then many books of halacha were written after that in history. But he was the first one. All the books of halacha that we have, Alter Rebbe wrote a Shulchan Aruch. There's a Shulchan Aruch written called Mishnah Brura. There's a Shulchan Aruch which is called Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the concise Shulchan Aruch. All these books of halacha only speak about the halachas that pertain to us today. They don't talk about the Beis Hamikdash, about laws that apply to sacrifices and other laws, only the things that are sort of applicable in the time of Golus, practical now. The Rambam is the only one that wrote a book that is all inclusive. Everything is there. And he also has the laws of Mashiach. In fact, his book altogether has 14 volumes. And the laws of Mashiach are the last volume, and it's the last two chapters of all the halachas of his entire writing. So the first thing is just as an introduction to realize and to know, because the subject of Mashiach is a controversial subject, and the controversy comes about mainly from lack of knowledge, and there's many extremes to this, but just as an introduction, to give you an example, I once gave a class. I used to give this class in Manhattan. It was once a week. These are people who are not yet affiliated with anything. Specifically created this class. After work, you can come have a light supper and study some Torah. And I taught the 13 principles of belief. And every week I taught another one or two. So 1 week, I started my class by saying, and today we're going to learn about the resurrection of the dead. This woman jumps up and says, I can't believe it. The last thing I would expect to hear in a Jewish classroom with a rabbi, resurrection of the dead, like that's so Christian. Where does that come from? It comes from the lack of knowledge that no, Mashiach is part of Judaism. In fact, that's where it came from in other religions. And not only part of Judaism, but it's one of the 13 principles of basic belief. I also had another incident which is similar to that. It was years back. When I was in Australia, I was doing the study, and I approached this woman. She was walking with her daughter. Would you like to make the blessing on the Esrog and the Lulav? Oh, I started by saying, are you Jewish? She said, not anymore. I said, really? What happened? She said, she converted. So I said, may I ask, why did you decide to convert? He says, no, there's nothing wrong with Judaism, just she loved a lot of things in Christianity, but mainly she loved the prayers. And there's one prayer that really captured my heart. Which one? The Lord is my shepherd. So because she loved chapter 23 in Tehillim, that's why she gave up Judaism and she embraced Christianity. So basically, unfortunately, people know much more about other religions before they know anything in Judaism. Mashiach doesn't belong to anyone else. Mashiach is a Jewish concept, a Torah concept, and it's based on Torah. And there are, like you saw in the Tanakh, hundreds of sources in Torah about the details related to Mashiach. So what you see here on the first page in the booklet is just to see that this is these are the 13 principles. In many communities, we don't do this in Chabad, but in many communities, every single day after the davening is over, people recite this. It's almost like I pledge allegiance to the 13 principles of Jewish belief every single day. And again, there's a prayer that is sung in many shuls. Adon Olam, I think, is something which we do in Chabad as well. But there's another song that took us out of a different siddur. If you look on the next page, where it starts with the word Yigdal. It's page number 3 here. Yigdal. And Yigdal is a song that's sung almost in every shul. And what is it? If you look closely, you'll see it's the 13 principles of belief in a song. And yet, when you approach certain people about certain principles of belief, they'll say, never heard of it, I don't know what you're talking about, but they sing it. So again, this is basic. And what we're learning in this book of Rambam is just to know the details and to know what's correct, what's not correct, how we look at things from a Torah perspective, and so on. Now, if you look on top of the page, it says chapter 11. Why don't we start with chapter 1? And the answer is, if you turn to the next page, at the top of the page, it says, Hilchot Melachim and Milchamotayim. I'm surprised I don't have the English, but basically the real title of this subject is the laws of kings and their wars. One of the mitzvahs in the Torah, 613 commandments, is to appoint a king. Now Mashiach, even though Mashiach is phenomenal and the world will be a changed world, all those things, but really it's nothing different than the basic mitzvah in the Torah that we should have a king. It's just that Mashiach will be a king in a time that's going to be unprecedented, and good things are going to happen in an unprecedented way. But as far as halacha is concerned, he has the position of a king, and in fact, it falls under all the laws that pertain to kings. So therefore, this is chapter 11 and 12 in the laws of kings, because Mashiach is one of the kings. He is a king. And so number one, many times people ask questions, could Mashiach be this? Could Mashiach do that? Could Mashiach do another thing? And the answer is anything that a king is not allowed to do, Mashiach can do. Or anything which we need to do for a king, we need to do for Mashiach because he is a king. And that's his position, except he's just a superior to all other kings. But he's subject to all the laws of Torah. I mean, we can learn about this more detailed later. You might have heard that in history of our people, there were people that were false Mashiachs. In fact, that's what Christianity is. It was a Jewish person, and he became a false Mashiach. In almost all the cases, not almost, I think in all the cases of false Mashiach, it was where they introduced things that were contrary to Torah, and when they were challenged, they would say, I'm Mashiach, and have different rules. I can say things that are different or do things. There's no such thing in Judaism. A king he's subjected to all the laws of Torah, not only like everybody else, even more than everybody else, because he's supposed to be the king. So anyone that comes along and starts making changes in Torah, that's your first sign that this person is a false Mashiach, as we'll learn about it more. So now the Rambam begins to explain this. So this is on page 5. chapter 11. It goes like this. HaMelech HaMashiach, in the future, this person is called Mashiach. He will arise and renew the Davidic dynasty, returning it to its initial sovereignty. What do those words mean? That number one, Mashiach will be a king. Number two, he'll be a king that will be a continuation. He will continue the dynasty of King David. So if you remember in the first book that I showed you, where it shows in history that the Jewish people got split into two kingdoms. And by the way, the one who made the two kingdoms was actually a prophet. It was a prophet called Achiashiloni. Hashem gave him this prophecy that he should appoint another king. And it was meant to be two kings living in harmony together. But unfortunately, the other king split and he became someone who violated Torah and he violated the laws. He actually worshipped idols. He forced people to worship idols and he became an evil king. But after that, he had children. His children had children. There were a few generations of kings, but basically it never changed all the way down. There were two kingdoms, 10 tribes. There were 2 tribes. When Mashiach comes, there'll be only one kingdom. By the way, there was another era where there were other kings, not King David's family, and that was Hanukkah. In Hanukkah, Yehuda HaMaccabee belonged to a family called Chashmonaim. And then when they won the war against the Greeks, they had kingdom, and their children had kingdom. And again, unfortunately, those kings they went off to the left, but they were kings, but not descendants of King David. And Hashem promised, and you saw a few of the sources in the first book, that Mashiach will be a descendant of King David, because one of his missions are that he's going to restore and reinstate the kingdom of David HaMelech once again, and that'll be kingdom forever. That's not going to change. And that's what he writes. He will renew the Davidic dynasty, returning it to its initial sovereignty, and Jews will only have one king. Number one. Number two, a second thing that he will do. Boine HaMikdash. He will rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. So we know there's a mitzvah in the Torah. It's not related to Mashiach, but it's a mitzvah in the Torah that Jews should build a temple for Hashem. And therefore, in the desert, they built what we call the Mishkan, the sanctuary. When they went into Israel, they also built something which was temporary. And they built another one which was temporary. Then they built something in Israel in a city which is called Shiloh. That lasted for over 300 and something years. And then finally, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, he built the Beis HaMikdash, which was the most magnificent Beis HaMikdash of all. And it lasted for 410 years. And then the Babylonians destroyed it. And then came Ezra, who built the second Beis HaMikdash 70 years later. And that stood for 420 years. And then came the Romans and they destroyed it. And this happened close to 2,000 years ago. And since then, we have no Beis HaMikdash. One of the things that Mashiach is meant to accomplish is, once again, rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. That will be called the third Beis HaMikdash. That's the second thing. Number three, Mekabetz Nitchei Yisrael. He will gather the dispersed of Israel. Initially, when we became a nation, we were all living in one place. Everybody was living in Israel. Once the exile began, that's when Jews began to be dispersed. And even though they came back to Israel, but it was never a full comeback. And since then, Jews spread out more and more and more. Probably today, there's never been anything in the world like it is today that is not a place in the 4 corners of the world that there aren't Jews there. Everywhere there are some Jews, and they're spread out. And one of the functions of Mashiach is that he will bring back all the dispersed, all the Jews who are spread out all over the world, and bring them back to Eretz Yisrael. This is the third thing. Number four, a fourth thing that he's going to do. In his days, the observance of all the statutes will return to their previous state, which means we will offer sacrifices, observe the sabbatical year, we'll observe the Jubilee year, according to all the particulars mentioned by the Torah. In other words, even though there are 613 mitzvahs, There are hundreds of mitzvahs which today we do not observe. Why? Because a lot of the mitzvahs are about things we need to do in the Beis Hamikdash. We don't have a Beis Hamikdash, so it doesn't apply. There are things that Kohanim need to do. There are things that the Levium need to do. By the way, if I say anything or any word that someone doesn't understand, please raise your hand and let me know and I'll explain it. I'm assuming that you know these words. Shouldn't assume anything, but if you have a question, ask the question. Yes?
I'm trying to follow what you're saying, 1, 2, and 3. Where are you?
I'm reading on page 5. I'm looking at this page, it's cute, it has a number in every corner of the page. 222, 223, number 1, number 5. Okay, if you hold the book this way, there's a number 5. The numbers are on the bottom, that's what counts. And on top of the page, it's say chapter 11. When Geulah will go bankrupt, that's chapter 11. And over there you have the things that I mentioned, 4 things that Moshiach is going to do. Also, contrary to many opinions that bringing sacrifice is really not a good thing, and killing animals, it's terrible. And for sure, once Moshiach comes, we'll never do it again. That's not the case, because if it would be a terrible thing, we never would have done it in the first place. And yes, it's one of those mitzvahs which we don't understand, one of those mitzvahs which has very deep mystical meaning behind it. We don't really understand what is behind it and why Hashem chose such a mitzvah. But nevertheless, it will once again be practiced when Mashiach comes. Once I had a student here that was giving me a very hard time about being vegetarian and not to eat animals. And then after she left, she sent me a book. The book was written by somebody who's promoting vegetarian diet. But he started, this is not a religious rabbi, a conservative rabbi, but I was pretty surprised when he starts off his book. He starts off his book by saying, this is the first page. It says, being that we're all hoping for Mashiach, which I wouldn't expect that coming from that source. We're all hoping for Mashiach. In order to bring Mashiach, we have to start living in a Mashiach-dik way. So being that when Mashiach comes, there won't be any more sacrifice and won't be eating meat. So now we should already start not eating meat. That was his introduction. But the whole thing is based on, as I'm saying, this is halacha, so this is not any metaphor. When Mashiach comes, we'll have sacrifices again. Another thing is there are laws in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, that you're not allowed to work on the land once in 7 years. Every 7th year is a sabbatical year. To this day, we keep count. And even though we observe this today, but it's not obligated according to halacha from the Torah. The rabbis instituted we should still keep these laws, not to forget them. But halachically, it doesn't really apply. It only applies when we have a Beis Hamikdash and we have all 12 tribes living together on the land of Israel. So in a sense, the land of Israel is not complete unless everybody, the whole nation, is living on the land. So the laws of Jubilee year doesn't apply. The laws of sabbatical year doesn't apply. A lot of the laws that apply to the land and to produce doesn't apply today. So therefore, the Rambam writes, once Mashiach comes, all that will return. We'll have that once again, all those laws. And that's the fourth thing that Mashiach will do. So the first thing that sort of catches your eye when you read this is, wait, what about all the miracles? Doesn't say anything about that. So we're going to learn later that no, it's not necessary for Mashiach to perform miracles to be identified as Mashiach. In fact, if you look at these words, we see a pattern here. Mashiach's function is going to be to make the world complete. The kingdom of the Jewish people and the Jewish nation will be complete. We'll have King David again. The Torah will be complete. We'll be observing all the 600 commandments again. The Beis Hamikdash will be complete once again. And the Jewish nation will be complete, that all the people are dispersed all over the world will all be reunited and living together in Eretz Yisrael. So if you look at it, really, it's all about Mashiach bringing completion and perfection into the world. And these are the 4 areas that Rambam points out. Okay, now we can turn the page. So look at page 6. Before we go on, I want to ask a question. And the question is, maybe it dawned on you to ask this question and you don't want to bring it up. But the question is, if you look at the 13 principles of belief, almost all of them, you can understand why it's a basic principle of Judaism. Like the first one is, I believe that God is one and he created the world. Of course, if you don't believe in that, it's not Judaism. If you don't believe that the Torah was given by Hashem through Moshe, also there's no Judaism. And the same is with many other things that are basic principles of Jewish belief. Why is Mashiach considered a basic pillar and a fundamental principle that without that, it's as if all of Jewish belief is sort of what's a foundation or a pillar? It can't stand without that. Why not? I'm going to just conclude my question. Why can't it be? A person believes that Hashem created the world and he gave us Torah and he gave us mitzvahs and he gave us everything. And of course, Mashiach is part of Torah, so you have to believe in it. But I'm asking, why is it a basic principle of belief? As if to say, if you take this away, as if the whole structure of Judaism collapses. Why? Why can't I believe that all the mitzvahs are right and everything is there? But I don't believe there'll be a time where the world will be utopia. Yeah.
Because the whole purpose of the creation was to bring Mashiach.
What if I don't believe that? I believe everything else. I keep Shabbos, I keep Yom Tov, I eat matzah.
Then why are you doing mitzvahs?
Because Hashem wants me to.
If Hashem wants you to, because he wants to make it your
That's because you study Chassidus. But then you just study Chumash, Gemara, Halacha. I don't have to know the reasons why. You just know that Hashem wants me to do A, B, C, D.
Hashem wants you to bring Mashiach.
No, so I understand that. Being that it's one of the details of Judaism, I can understand. But why would I say, if you don't believe in that, all of Yiddishkeit would collapse? Because that's what it is with the other principles of belief. Let me read. What does the first one say? I believe that Hashem is the one who does and did and is responsible for everything that's happening in the world. I believe he's the only one. There isn't another God. And all these things, if you don't believe that, there's no Judaism, right? It's all about listening to Hashem and serving Hashem. If I don't believe that the words of the prophets are true, then I don't believe that the Torah is true. If I don't believe in Moshe, then I don't believe that the Torah is true. If I don't believe that the Torah is eternal and can't be changed, then God forbid, that's what Christianity says, that's what Islam says. Oh, the Torah was changed. They believe that God gave the Torah. I don't know if you know the other religions, but Christianity believes that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people at Har Sinai, but they believe that 1,000 years later, Hashem said, I changed my mind, I changed my people, and I changed my rules. And Islam says also the same thing, but it's a different group of people. And we say Hashem never changes his mind and never changes rules, and the Torah is the Torah. But if a person doesn't believe that the Torah is eternal, then all of Yiddishkeit could collapse. But why, if I don't believe Mashiach, would that be like all of Yiddishkeit collapsing? So one of the ways that's explained, there must be other answers as well, but one of the ways it's explained is that not believing in Mashiach, in a sense, is like not believing in Hashem. Why is that? Because
So if you believe God is good, that's a couple of Mashiach, you see all the suffering and not good. It's right to, yes, God is good.
okay, that's where I'm going. Exactly with that point. That basically the world, the way we see it now, does not make any sense, especially according to Torah. Good people are suffering. Bad people are on top and they have a lot of honor, they're making a lot of money, and they have a lot of power, and they get things their way. And the world does not make any sense, especially if we believe in Hashem, that he's the essence of goodness, the essence of kindness. How could people be suffering in such horrific ways that we know and we hear every day? I'm not talking about a Holocaust. I'm talking about even on an individual level, what people go through, the crying, the tears, the pain, the suffering, and people who are good people and wonderful people. So just because they did something wrong, therefore Hashem comes crashing down on them. Nothing, it does not make any sense. So the world, the way we know it, makes no sense. The only thing that makes sense, again, to us, is that the world, the way we know it, is a means to an end. It's leading to something which ultimately will be exactly what we're imagining, a world of goodness and happiness, and everything will be good physically, everything will be good spiritually. There won't be any wars, there won't be any jealousy, there won't be any sickness, there won't be any competition, there won't be any pain, there won't be nothing to be crying about. It'll be an amazing world. And so why is things happening now? This is a part of a process that we're going through. I always think of things that we have here in the physical world. You know, when you walk by a construction site, they're building a building. Imagine the building is 13-story building. You walk by, what do you see? You see a big hole in the ground, a lot of dirt, water, filth, and you say, "This is a building? This is what they're doing? Is that what they're spending money for?" And the other person says to you, "Wait, you'll see." Because one day goes by, a month goes by, a year goes by. So someone who's not familiar would say, "It doesn't make any sense. Why are they doing this? They just ruined the whole block. Look what they did." But anyone who knows, the ABC of anything in life realizes, no, this is just until they get it done. I remember the Jewish Children's Museum that's on the corner, years until they built that museum. The whole block, nobody could walk through. Traffic was blocked, and there were cars and trucks and a mess and dirt and filth, and all that is part of a process that eventually will have something magnificent in its place. So therefore, the same is with Hashem and the world, that even though we don't understand why he did it this way, but once I understand and I believe in Moshiach, which means I believe that Hashem is in essence good and kind, and those who do good will be rewarded with tremendous, infinite reward, and those who do evil, the results will be the opposite, the wicked, evil people. So why are things the way they are now? Because for some reason or other, this is a process that we need to go through to get to that stage. And then it's not a contradiction to my belief in Hashem. But imagine if someone says, "I don't believe there'll ever be such a good time." What are they really saying? That I don't believe that Hashem, either I'm saying I don't believe Hashem is really in control. This is nature, and you can't change that. That itself is not belief in Hashem. Or it means that they don't believe that Hashem is really in essence good, and he has some sort of a pleasure by doing the things that are happening now. Either way, it means there's something wrong with my belief in Hashem. So belief in Mashiach is an expression of true belief in Hashem. Yeah.
Why is Chabad the most pushing of Mashiach? Why are we so excited for it and proud of it, and you don't hear it so much from?
The reason for that is because in Chabad, based on the Rebbe's words, Mashiach is part of current events. In other words, everyone believes in Mashiach. A person who's a religious Jew, they believe in Mashiach.
Right.
But generally speaking, it's like, when Mashiach will come. Like someone once told me that he was waiting for a bus. And the bus is supposed to come at a certain time, and it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, it still didn't come. So he turned to someone else that was standing there, and he says to him, "Are you sure that this bus is really supposed to come? Maybe it's not running today or something?" It was two religious Jews. So the other Jew says, "I wish Mashiach would be so sure, like I'm sure that this bus is coming." In other words, he hasn't come for 1,000 years, 2,000 years. We're still saying that he's going to come. So it's definitely something which people believe in, but who knows when it's going to happen? You ask the average person, they'll tell you, "Well, I don't believe in my lifetime, but eventually I'm sure he'll show up." The Rebbe is the one who came out with this announcement years ago, many years ago. We'll learn about that in detail, but especially in 1990 intensified more, that we're living through now the process of Mashiach unfolding. And because it's more, because based on the Rebbe's words, it's current events, it's practical. And the Rebbe not just spoke about it as telling us good news, but basically saying it's a time now to intensify good things in order to make it happen sooner. So that's why it's more relevant to Chabad. But guarantee you, if you go online, you'll see that right now, it's not like it was 30 years ago, it's spreading all over, in all communities. That there's a lot of commotion, a lot of talk about Mashiach and how things that are happening in the world, there are sources that actually point that the things that are happening now, how that's going to happen. Mashiach comes. Yeah.
And to believe he's coming at any second, like, is that a Chabad thing, or everyone should be believing this?
So let's read the next line in the Rambam. You're on the right track. Anyone who does not believe in him, who does not await his coming, which means he doesn't believe that I'm anticipating he's coming now, denies not only the statements of the other prophets, but statements that are in the Torah given by Moshe, our teacher, because the Torah testifies to his coming in Deuteronomy, and he goes on and brings the source. So there's two things here. When it says here, whoever doesn't believe in him, that's one thing. What is that one thing? What if a person says, I believe, yes, like we just said, Hashem is good and Hashem is kind, and there's no doubt that what we're going through now is just a process that's leading up to a time that's going to be beautiful in this world. I just don't believe that one person is going to be able to change the world in such a way. That doesn't make any sense. I believe it will be an era of redemption, not necessarily a person. And even now, when you hear a lot of commotion or controversy about Mashiach, most of the controversy is about the person. Is there a person? Who is the person? Could it be this person? Could it be that person? But the belief in Mashiach itself, in redemption, that the world will be a better place to live, that's something which people could relate to in a much easier way. So whatever a person says, I believe in Mashiach, but I believe there'll be an era of redemption, not necessarily be a person that's going to change this huge world that has, what today, 8, 9 billion people. They're all going to become different. This one person is going to make it happen. So that's, if you look at the Rambam, it says, whoever doesn't believe in him. And in fact, the 13 principles of belief, which I said before is like our pledging allegiance. Look, let's look at those words, which says pretty much the same. I would say there might maybe 180 songs that were composed with these words. But these are the words of the Rambam describing our belief in Mashiach. It's on the second page in the booklet, and it's Ani Mamin number 12, I believe. I believe with complete faith in the coming of Mashiach. And again, even though he may tarry, nevertheless, I anticipate every day that he will come. You see the emphasis? It doesn't say, even though it may tarry or the time may be delayed, I believe in it. I believe in him. That we believe that just like the redemption from Egypt, which was also a major change. Of course, Hashem is the one who did it, but it was through a person. His name was Moshe Rabbeinu. And just like the Jews were freed from Babylon, and there was a Jewish leader, his name was Ezra. He was the prophet who led the Jews out of Babylon. So too, when the Jews will go out of this Gullus, there is someone who is the king. That's the person we call Mashiach, and he will lead us into this new era. But if a person says, I believe in the era, but not in the person, that means that I don't believe in Mashiach. I don't believe in Mashiach properly. That's the first word. Who Einu Shamayim and Boy doesn't believe in him. The second thing is, what you just brought up is, what if I don't believe, I'm not anticipating he's coming every day. I believe he's going to come for sure, 100%, but I can't see it happening now. One day it's going to happen. What's wrong with that? That sounds pretty kosher. So the Rambam says, no, we have to believe every day that, I'm not saying I believe it's happening now, I believe every day that it could happen now, could happen next moment, if Hashem wants. Why? Again, one way of explaining it, if anyone has another one that's acceptable, One way of explaining it is if I don't believe that it could happen now, I'm really not so strong in my belief that it's going to happen in the future. In other words, whenever it happens, it's going to be something miraculous, something that only Hashem could put together. So if I believe it can happen in 100 years from now, why can't I believe that it can happen today? It's like some people say, okay. Some people say about faith in miracles, and they say, I don't believe in miracles. This is a miracle. It's a miracle. What do you mean? The Torah tells us about miracles. When the Jews went out of Egypt, the sea split. This happened. The stories with the miracles that happened in times of the prophets. And sometimes we hear the reaction. Okay, that was then, and that I believe. Those miracles that are the Chumash. In other words, I believe the miracles that happened 3,000 years ago, and I also believe there'll be miracles in 100 years from now. But I don't believe it can happen today. What does it really mean? It means that's not reality to me. That's 3,000 years ago. And the future is also not reality. When you talk about reality, it's hard for me to believe that Hashem could pull this through today. That means, again, I'm lacking in my belief in Mashiach. If I truly believe in Mashiach, then I should, number one, believe that it could happen today. And a person should also anticipate it. That's another point. I should want it to happen today. Which means I should understand that if Mashiach comes, this is something that I should want and I should desire. Which is another subject we might need a little bit more time to go into. But often you hear from people that believe in Mashiach and actually afraid of it. I'm afraid Mashiach is going to come. Someone just yesterday, speaking to a group of women here, someone just brought up that she has a daughter that she goes to a religious school and she says she's afraid of Mashiach. Who knows what's going to happen to her, and all the bad things she does will be exposed and will be. No, believing Mashiach is something which we should be hoping for, waiting for, be excited about. So again, if someone is not, that means they don't really get it. They're not really understanding what Mashiach is all about. And I think the best proof to that is also that it's in our davening. And also, this is relevant to another subject, but I once had a friend of mine that sat down, said that into me, sat down, and he counted how many times a day do we ask Hashem for Mashiach. So someone who davens, a man who davens 3 times a day, Shakris, Mincha, Ma'ariv, maybe he has a meal during the day and benches. He counted literally about 50 times a day that we ask Mashiach, one way or another. Either we ask the Beis Hamikdash should be rebuilt, or we ask that we should have the prophets again, or we ask that we should have the Sanhedrin again, we should bring the sacrifice again. And we do this 50 times a day. So obviously, according to Torah, I should be having a desire for Mashiach to come, not be afraid of him. Otherwise, I wouldn't be asking for it 50 times a day. So the Rambam writes, number one, to believe that it can happen any moment, and to be anticipating, meaning I should want that Mashiach should come. And if I don't, then it goes against what the Torah teaches us about Mashiach. One of the things that I want to do with this booklet is you'll see that we have questions, which will be a review after we finish. But in the beginning of the booklet, you have about 66 terms, quotes, phrases that are all related to the subject of Mashiach. And as we go along, we'll point it out and you'll write it down. This is your copy. I specifically didn't write the translation because the point is to become familiar with the Torah terms. So I wrote it in English. Malka Mashiach, Ikris Mashiach, Yemesa Mashiach, Kates, so on and so forth. As we go along, I'll point out which thing we just covered. That's one of these terms that are written here. Okay, to be continued. Again, this you keep holding with you in your books. I think they'll hear me if I blow shelter here.
Yeah, the doors are.
Yeah,